Welcome to Studio 21. Our guest today, Chuck Cissel, the Artistic Director for the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame. Let's talk just a little bit first about your background. You're a native Tulsan, but you've got some performance behind you on Broadway and other places. Tell me about that.
Well, it all began at Booker T. Washington High School there, being a part of the Fine Arts Department, and then on to the University of Oklahoma as a Fine Arts major. And I turned professional my junior year in college at the Casa Mañana Theater in the Round in Fort Worth, Texas, and then the next year at Kansas City Starlight Theater. The next progression was Broadway. So I went to Broadway, and luckily enough, the first show I auditioned for was Hello, Dolly with the legendary Pearl Bailey and the legendary Cap Calloway. And they both chose me to be in the show, so that was my introduction, and then I went on to do seven or eight Broadway shows, the last of which was an original cast member of a chorus line. And while I was in a chorus line, the late, great Michael Bennett recorded me on a song created by one of the members of his inner team, Bobby Thomas, a great drummer. And so that opened the door for me to think about recording, and I took a break from a chorus line on vacation, went to Los Angeles, and I got a recording contract with Arista Records and released 2 albums, the first of which was the international dance hit Cissel and Hot, and then the next year with If I Had the Chance. So from Greenwood to Broadway.
That's a heck of a resume. You're back in Tulsa, you're back home.
Yeah.
Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame, the artistic director.
Yes.
What's the mission of the Oklahoma Hall of Fame?
Well, the mission of the Jazz Hall of Fame is twofold. First, to promote, preserve, illuminate, and honor all of the great artists that come from the state of Oklahoma in the jazz, blues, and gospel art forms. And then the second part of that mission statement is the music arts educational programming for the youth of this community and for the state of Oklahoma.
Now, you've got great programs for youngsters. You've got ongoing events, and they can go to your website to see some of the great events that are happening all year round. Mm-hmm. You also have a heck of a facility, a historic facility. Mm-hmm. Where the heck are you guys located?
We're located in this beautiful Art Deco architectural wonder called originally the Tulsa Union Depot train station, but now called the Jazz Depot. And of course, it's at First and Cincinnati in downtown Tulsa. And back in the day, in the early 1930s, right on through the 60s, it was the hub of this city. And of course, with everybody using trains as travel, it kind of went down the tubes after the airline industry came into play. So right now it's our home, and we're delighted and thrilled to be able to serve the community at this beautiful, beautiful facility.
You talk about the railroad station. In reading some old ads from the 1920s and 30s, that railroad station and the bus lines that were coming into Tulsa were really kind of a key for a crossroads for musicians as well. The ads dealing with the days of segregation said, all right, it's close to the railroad station, it's close to the bus lines, so if you're coming through town, you can stay at this hotel or that hotel. Tell me about the 1920s music scene in Tulsa.
Well, the music scene in Tulsa was, of course, on this side of Archer, on Greenwood. And it had a number of great clubs. One I can think of right away is Love's Lounge. Clarence Love, a great musician and band leader, had the first all-girls band, had his club there in Deep Greenwood, as we called it back then. And of course, when you speak of hotels, there was only one hotel for African Americans to stay in. It was a Smalls Hotel. And when you speak of the train station being a meeting place, the train station that we now inhabit was a deeply segregated building. One side of the building is where whites came in, the other side is where African Americans came in. So in the 20s and 30s, though there was disparity, the music, as in the case of most cities, there was always, quote, the black side of town, where the music was happening. And you had a number of white musicians who would come over to Deep Greenwood, either to go into the clubs to hear the guys or to stand outside as teenagers and hear this thing called jazz. And a lot of the great jazz musicians that we have today, the likes of Gail Williamson, Sonny Gray, and many more, it all began with them as teenagers coming to Deep Greenwood to listen to the likes of any number of great stars, Ernie Fields and Cecil McBee, and Charlie Christian, all in Deep Greenwood.
Now, you also have a situation where when people from the outside who are not from Oklahoma or not from Tulsa think of jazz, they think of Kansas City and New Orleans, but really Tulsa was kind of a crossroads for both influences, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And when you think of the Kansas City sound, it actually began in Oklahoma. When you think of Claude Fiddler Williams and Jay McShann, both are highly honored in Kansas City. So whenever I go there, I have to tell them, remember, these guys are from Muskogee, Oklahoma. When you think of the Blue Devils, it's peppered with artists from the state of Oklahoma. When you think of bebop with Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, Howard McGee was right in the mix from Oklahoma. So when you think about jazz, it's not just Kansas City and Chicago or New Orleans. Oklahoma played a key role because people migrated from down south into here, and bands, high school bands were real big back in the day, and the teachers, it was an honor to be in a band. Many of those teachers pushed those kids to become great artists, and many of the pioneers of jazz in Oklahoma came from high schools with great teachers. So you have Count Basie's main singer, his lead singer, Jimmy Rushing. He was 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide, and they called him Mr. 5 by 5. One of the great blues singers of all time from Oklahoma City. You have a number of great artists from Tulsa, from Muskogee, even from Yale, Oklahoma. Chet Baker, the great trumpeter, the vocalist that made My Funny Valentine a standard. You have Patti Page from Claremore. You have Kay Starr. You have Lee Wiley. The list goes on and on and on. Right here from Oklahoma.
When you talk about musical history, you really kind of talk about an evolution. You were mentioning the migration of people from the Deep South and coming up this way and over to Kansas City. What was the kind of music that preceded jazz and ragtime and led to jazz and ragtime?
Well, it kind of began with ragtime, but before that it began in the fields with hollers and yells in the cotton fields, tobacco fields down south. And that music became what you would call as gospel music, so to speak. Swing low, they were key songs telling you how to get out of the traps that had been set for us or for people of color. And then that gospel piece turned into blues. It began to wail and weep. And then I have the blues, baby, I got the blues. Then the blues sort of turned into ragtime. It became a little more sophisticated, and the stride piano. Then it went on into this whole jazz thing with Jelly Roll Morton down in New Orleans, and Louis Armstrong. Satchmo came in there and just whipped everything into a whole new level. He kicked everything to a whole new level, created improvisation, created the whole non-syllabic sing, which is called scatting. Shada-ba-dee-da-bop, boo-ba-dop, bidoo-yee-dop. That sort of thing. Satchmo did that. So there's this evolution of music, and then as people began to feel freer, and they would begin to migrate throughout the South, going north into Chicago, into Kansas City, into Oklahoma, into the higher part of Texas, even into Nebraska.
You're talking about an evolution from farm fields and churches into clubs. What about recording of traditional jazz music? And is there a place that's unique for Tulsa in that?
Well, do you mean the music of jazz?
In terms of, hearing it on a record.
Well, I wouldn't say that Tulsa did. There were race records, and so that wasn't here. That was more in New York City, Chicago, where you had the real big metropolitan areas. But everybody here bought the records. When I grew up, my father had Billie Holiday records, had Mom's Mabley records, Red Fox records, Duke Ellington records, Lena Horne. So we had that stuff in our homes, but the recording was not necessarily done in the Midwestern states. It was more Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City.
All right, so you had live performance, you got the records. What about over the airways?
Oh, radio was huge. Well, it was just radio. When you think back, of course, this predates CDs and DVDs and television and all of that stuff. It was the radio. We all sat around. We even listened to Glenn Miller, the Benny Goodman Orchestra, the likes of Rosemary Clooney, Nat King Cole. You know, even a little later, a guy by the name of Frank Sinatra, who actually...
What was that name again?
Frank Sinatra, who loved jazz, and He could swing. Frank Sinatra could swing. He was a rare, rare entity, and worked with Count Basie and Duke and just a number of great, great band leaders.
When you talk about music, you talk about a coming together of the races, and actually a copying of what really originated with African American music, with a guy in the 1950s who's probably best known for that, Elvis Presley. Tell me about that interchange where suddenly the jazz music of a black community becomes mainstream and becomes everybody's music.
Well, and then it folded into rock and roll with people like Louis Jordan, kind of the swing music. That's really a little bit of rock and roll. It kind of was a precursor to rock and roll, and then you had Little Richard, you had Fats Domino. You had those cats in there, and then this kid by the name of Elvis Presley heard that, saw the look, saw the whole wiggly thing, and of course with great funding and the way the country was at the time was a little divided. It was music that brought the races together. Little Richard would perform with mixed houses, though they may be the blacks sat upstairs and the whites downstairs, but then that broke too, where they all could sit together on one side of the theater, one on another side of the theater. Then the doors were burst open with rock and roll, and then of course the Motown sound, the Stax sound, and then the Beatles came over in the 60s and just tossed everything up in the air.
Well, the B.B. King.
B.B. King, great blues and jazz artist.
And the B.B. stands for Beale Street Blues, and that was out of the Memphis area, and we know now that that was an incredible influence on Elvis Presley.
God, yes. Well, it was an incredible influence on Elvis Presley, the Rolling Stones, the Who, all of the bands. They looked at those guys. That's where that soul and that passion came from, and they souped it up.
Now, we're going to do kind of a quasi-game show with you right
Okay.
now. And one of the neatest things about going to okjazz.org, which is your webpage for the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame, is looking at the inductees in there. And I'm going to mention some names if you want to jump in with some other names. And you mentioned Ernie Fields Sr. Before, but I mean, few people know he had one of the top bands in the country, and they're based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. #1 song on the charts.
Absolute Mr. in the Mood, Ernie Fields Sr., and traveled all around the country. We worked with Jimmy Rushing, the lead singer of the Count Basie Orchestra. We have a number of wonderful pieces featuring Mr. Fields with a number of other great big artists. I mean, Mr. Fields was big. And not only that, but his son, Ernie Fields Jr., took on the same musical championship from his father, and he too made quite a name for himself and is still doing as much. He is featured quite a bit on American Idol, and he is the contractor there for American Idol. So you have Ernie Fields.
Well, let me keep with Fields, because I know you want to go a couple of other places first. All right, Ernie Fields Sr., #1 hit. He was on Dick Clark's American Bandstand, which is at that time was the epitome of exposure.
Yes.
And then Ernie Fields Jr., I remember at the funeral for Ernie Fields Sr., Ernie Fields Jr. performed. It
Yes.
was one of the most amazing moments I've ever witnessed.
Yes.
We got another name to, we have Lowell Folsom.
Great blues artist, right here from Tulsa. Just an exceptional blues artist, made a name for himself all around this country.
And the Blue Devils.
Oh yes, well, the Blue Devils almost kicked the whole thing off here in Oklahoma. A number of great artists. I mean, gosh, I'd sit here all day trying to name everybody, but it was filled with top-notch jazz and blues artists. And the likes of Prez Young, Lester Prez Young, was a part of that group. Count Basie actually heard the Blue Devils here out in the Smalls Hotel on Greenwood. That's what kind of kicked him into the whole jazz thing right here in Tulsa.
And a lot of the members of the Blue Devils, they went on and they were part of Count Basie. They were part of Duke Ellington's band, too.
And Jay McShann's band, too.
That is something. Recent history, a giant in so many different ways. Wayman Tisdale.
Yes.
Talk about him.
Oh, boy, it's still touchy. Just a real larger-than-life personality, a real larger-than-life talent, both on the basketball court and in the recording studio, and as a smooth jazz artist that megawatt smile that he had and the magnanimous spirit as well still engulfs us today. And it's been a little while since he's passed away, but I tell you, he has left an indelible impression on many of us here, not only in Oklahoma and not only in the United States, but around the world. He was very, very talented, might even say gifted. Self-taught as a musician. He's an Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame inductee, and he's just a marvelous, marvelous human being.
And #1 on the Billboard charts a number of times with his work.
Yes.
Now, he had a presence at the Jazz Hall of Fame.
Oh, of course. We presented Wayman in concert there. We have had a screening of the Wayman Tisdale story, the premiere screening at the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame. It's his life story and his legacy. And we have had the Wayman Challenge, a television show where he chose talent from Oklahoma to take on the tour with him, and he chose a group called Wall Street, and they represented well in the Caribbean with Wayman on tour, and it was the last tour that he took to the Caribbean, and Wall Street was there with him before he passed away.
Bob Wills.
Bob Wills, oh, what can you say? Just top-notch giant. You know, loved jazz. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, because you always think of him as country and maybe
yeah, you think of him
hillbilly.
more like country and hillbilly, bluegrass. But he was a Western swing artist. And Western swing is the first cousin to jazz because it says it in the title, Western swing. And what does jazz do? Jazz swings. Western swing. It swings. Very similar thing. The only thing is the violin is more prominent in Western swing music.
And you've got Dr. Stephen Wiley, gospel music.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't really make that connection. The gospel is where it all starts, really.
Oh, yes. Yes. And Dr. Wiley is a rare, one-of-a-kind artist. When we had him inducted into the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame, he did a gospel rap, which is what he was really known for, and he's a great minister as well, but gospel rap was his forte, and I'm telling you, he tore the house down. It was the first time we've ever had rap at the Jazz Hall of Fame.
And this is really kind of another evolutionary story where you
Yes.
start with gospel, you get into the Christian rock and into rap music, and you reach a new audience and get a message across.
And it's evolution, and you know, that's just what happens, you know, when you come from rock and roll into rap music or R&B music, then into neo-soul music, rap music, hip-hop. It just keeps evolving into a new thing. And I'm waiting for it to evolve, where we are right now, to evolve right on out of here so that we can get back to real music, real lyrics, sophistication, humor, great writing. There's nothing like the Great American Songbook. The songs of George Gershwin, Duke Ellington, Cole Porter, Harold Arlen. They will last forever. That's what I'm looking for now.
Now, Chuck, I did interrupt you, and I apologize for that. You were to get into a couple other names. Are there some other people you want to mention?
Well, I mean, you know, we think of all the great pioneers that come from the state of Oklahoma, but we have the likes of Pat Moore. She's a young lady right here from Tulsa, a great jazz pianist, great vocalist, has her own band. The same can be said of Earl Clark. These are contemporary artists that are Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame inductees. You can think of so many artists that we've inducted into the Jazz Hall of Fame, and those are just two that I'll lay on you right now, but it's been an incredible journey the past 22 years at the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame, and the number of artists we've inducted, from Dave Brubeck to Ramsey Lewis to Marilyn May. We just keep this thing growing and expanding.
Now, if anybody wants just a great time, if they're on the internet, go to the oklahomajazz.org. Or okjazz.org and look at those inductees and the histories there. It's a great read. Final question, and this is one that kind of reflects the times we live in. There's always challenges to make something, nurture something, to make it grow. What can people do to help support the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame?
Well, we are a nonprofit organization, 501(c), so donations from individual donors, from corporate donors, and from those who would like to even contribute in-kind contributions. They're always welcomed at the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame, and they can reach us at okjazz.org or call the hall at 918-281-8600. We look to make everybody a part of our family at the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame. It's a warm, fuzzy place because music is the universal language. And anytime you're sitting in the audience, anytime you're there, you feel like you're at home. In addition to that, the Union Depot building has this wonderful spirit of many souls who've gone before us, and you can still feel the essence of people watching their children go off to college or their sons go off to war or going to visit grandma in Kansas City or Claremore. You can sort of feel the energy in the hall. It's a wonderful spirit. So in addition to providing donations, come by and visit. Sign up on our email list and become a part of our family so that you can indeed enjoy our Sunday concerts at 5 p.m. on most Sundays.
Chuck Cissel, it is always great visiting with you, and I look forward to the relationship that TCC has with the Jazz Hall of Fame in the future.
I am so honored. Thanks for having me here today, Loren.
And thank you for joining us for Studio 21.